I think we're live.
Hey, we're live. All right.
It is November 2023, and we are here with Bob Peck. He's a muralist. He's an abstract painter. You invited our community, our creative community, here into your space, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, I figured why not? Let's do it at the house. You can kind of see a little bit about my life and some of my artwork throughout the place, and we'll go from there.
So go from there.
Yeah.
For those who are joining us now, you might be watching us live, and you may also be watching the recorded version. We encourage you to jot a note, a comment, a question, and whether we're live and answer it right now, or you're watching the recorded version, we'll get back to that.
Absolutely.
And we're excited about tonight. And as I was coming up your steps,
Yeah.
I recognize a familiar and friendly smell of aerosol.
Yeah. There's a lot of paint in this house.
There's a lot of paint in this house.
I try and air it out every once in a while, but when I paint in my home studio, even though I kind of close it off and ventilate, it gets through the place. So yeah, you'll definitely smell spray paint in this place. I probably have a couple hundred cans in the studio right now at all times. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're gonna get into some detailed questions. If you were with us last week, we were with steelworker and painter.
Okay.
Daryl Knezovich, and Daryl works down in the steel mills. He's a younger dude with some mad talent. He had gone decades without doing any work, and I think it was like in a lunch break or so he picked up a pen and started to create, or picked up his paints and started to create on lunch. And his canvases are gritty. You could see the soot and stuff, of him working in his space. And he's a great artist. And if you were watching that, you got to enjoy Daryl's story. And if you haven't, you can just go on to Tuesday at 7 and or on my profile and just kind of scroll down and catch that. However, if you shared that video last week, then your name is in this hat.
Oh.
And Daryl gave away a painting. And so you're going to choose a winner of
the fate is in my hands.
Daryl Knezovich's work.
All right, here we go.
Just choose one there.
Yep, got it right here.
And who's the winner?
Our winner is Deb Sherrill, Sherl. So Deb, you got yourself a nice piece of art. I saw his work last week, and it is really awesome. So congratulations.
So I'm going to put this in my pocket so I don't forget. So Deb Sherrill, I know Deb, and she is a great artist as well. But I think Deb is actually going to be doing some kind of mill and urban artwork herself.
Nice.
So this is perfect.
That's perfect, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Deb, for your shares. Thank you, everybody, for your shares. And thank you, Daryl, for the interview last week. And what we're going to do is we're going to encourage you to share this week as well. So in the very bottom left-hand side of your screen, there's a share button. When you hit that share button, we know it. Mm-hmm. And we will thank you, and we'll put your name in the drawing. But when you hit that share button, it'll allow you to share to your friends list, general friends list. It'll allow you to share to a group. It'll also allow you to share to an individual or several individuals. Facebook will prompt you. But the point is if you share it, we appreciate it. You'll enlarge the audience of folks that see Tuesday 7, certainly enlarge the audience to see Bob Peck's work and has a chance to hear his story. But you'll have a chance to win, and we'll pull out a Sharpie and autograph that print as well, right?
I'm going to give away a signed print. It's a collaborative piece from myself and Rich Sylar, who I do a lot of work with. You may be familiar with our Don't Panic collaborative pieces, so we'll show that in a little bit when we check out the studio space.
I've got a couple questions.
Absolutely.
All right, and so I'm not even going to go right to art. I'm going to go to a couple other observations, and that is, and as we're here, if you were sitting in our perspective and you were looking, you'd see artwork to the left, you'd see artwork to the right, you'd see artwork over this way. But I see a bike over there.
Oh yeah, I love riding.
You love riding, and I notice that all the time. Like you're on and riding.
That's my Zen place.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
So, I try to think back to when it all began, and I just have always been on a bike. It's funny, though, because I actually was a late bloomer on bike riding. I didn't start riding until I was about 10, and I remember seeing other kids, younger kids riding. I was like, I want to do that, and I would try, and I couldn't get it. And finally, when I got it, there was no turning back. So my whole life, I grew up as a kid in the 80s, so I got BMX in there into the 90s, and then even in the late 90s, I was a bike courier downtown. So I was one of the guys delivering packages, pre-internet. We were just sending documents back and forth, all weather, all day, riding our bike through Cleveland, having fun while we were working. So it's just in my blood. Yeah, I try to ride at least a couple hundred miles every year. It's my goal. So yeah, just trying to wrap up the season and hopefully get a few more rides in before it gets too cold.
Yeah. If you are following Bob's socials, you see the bike in there all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And we appreciate you sharing that. You have been painting for a few years.
Yeah, just a few.
Take us back to kind of the launch. Take us back to the launch.
Yeah.
And then, the medium you started with, and, maybe the evolution into modern day.
In the early years, I was a comic book nerd. So we're talking during elementary school, so I was always drawing, different comic book characters. I grew up, like everybody, on X-Men and all that stuff. And over time, because I grew up in Cleveland, I saw a lot of graffiti around me. And I was just like really impressed with the scale of graffiti art and the color and stuff like that. It was just huge, And so I started like asking questions to older kids and even my mom. And my mom, she didn't get it. She's like, I don't know, those kids are criminals, But once I started talking to older kids, like, yeah, my brother goes by this name and that name. And it was like this whole secret world of art, and these alter egos. It was like it was kind of like a superhero,
Yeah.
So I was going from one style of like superhero to another, And so I started learning about the culture and what it meant. And, obviously there's the vandalism aspect, but then I also learned that there's history to it and there's respect for other artists and this and that. And, I started dabbling and drawing as a teenager. And one night I finally got the nerve to go out and paint. And we did the old school, my friend's saying he's staying the night at my house and I'm staying at his house. And we both snuck out and we went and painted a wall down in our neighborhood. And, the next day we were the cool kids. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe you guys. And it was awful. It was like this rainbow colored drippy mess. And all the kids in the neighborhood posed in front of it, taking pictures. And I was like, this is it. I was hooked, That was probably 1992. And I always say my official date from there is like 93 is when I really was like, I'm going out. I'm leaving the neighborhood. I'm going to get my name all over the city. And I did that for years until like the, mid 2000s. And then I started seeing public art, but not really understanding what it was.
Yeah.
And people started reaching out to me and saying, hey, we'd love to have you do this wall. And I'm like, oh my God, they're offering me a place to paint. And on top of it, sometimes it was like, we've got a paycheck for you. And I was like, this is incredible, And I started working my way doing, at first, graffiti on, public art projects. And then how the abstract came into play was, it was kind of funny because I actually hated abstract art. I was like, abstract art is for people who don't know how to make real art. It was my thought process back then. And so I was going to gallery shows, and I would see all this art, and I would go, well, I'm going to put graffiti in a gallery show. So I started doing these colorful backgrounds with spray paint, designs and splatters and whatnot, and then I would draw graffiti with paint markers on top. And as I was going, I would look at the background on each one. I go, I really like that background. Let me set it aside. And then I'd start the next one. Yeah, I like that one too. And so I was stacking up these unfinished pieces. And then I'd ask my friend to come over and say, hey, what do you think of those? He goes, oh, they look cool. When are you going to finish them? And I'm staring at them. I go, I think they're done. And lo and behold, I'd fallen into abstract art. So I took that energy of graffiti, the movement, the lines, the colors, all that, using spray paint, and just left behind the boundaries of the letters and started just letting it all explode, And here we are,
Here we are decades later.
Yeah, yeah.
3 decades later.
Yeah, it's
right?
been a long time, yeah.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. It's funny how you add up the years and you're like, yeah, this has been
30 years. I know. I said that today on a camera, and I was just like, oh my God, it's incredible to say 30 years of art. Yeah. So
it sounds as though your the hook was the community and the art here. Were you following any other muralists or graffiti artists? Were you keeping track with what was going on in different cities, Chicago or New York, or were you just in Cleveland?
Well, once the internet kind of became standard issue, and I mean more later on, like, 2005 almost, where every house had, the internet. Then, everybody started meeting. There was like early websites with like message boards, like kind of Reddit style. And then, you would talk to these people and they'd say, hey, I'm coming to Cleveland next year or next month or whatever. And you're like, yeah, whatever. Okay, well, I'll see you if you come. And they would just show up, and they'd be like, oh my God, you're really here. Like, you're a real person. And then we'd go paint and have a good time. And some of those people I'm still friends with to this day. So that's when I started really. I mean, I knew that it was outside of Cleveland. I knew, New York and LA. But I'm like, there's a whole scene in like Wisconsin and all these places you never think about. Oklahoma and middle of nowhere, Idaho, even. Kids are out there in cornfields painting freight trains. And yeah. So I mean, I really started to understand the not only national but global phenomenon of graffiti at the time, and then now even into like street art and public art. Yeah.
Have you been, when you connect and you witness or you collaborate with artists from different cities, is there a style like that? Does Cleveland have a Cleveland style, that's different from the rest? Because you guys, it's a different stew here.
So Cleveland definitely used to have a Cleveland style. Definitely in the 90s, it was very distinct. There was a couple founding fathers of graffiti that all knew each other and then started to teach all of us, so it was like cousins almost, and so we all, as a second tier of artists in the 90s, would meet and hang out. And so yeah, Cleveland definitely back in the day had this very like kind of like angular, chunky, heavy style, where like out west coast, it was very like wispy, tentacly kind of stuff, and more almost based off of like LA, like cholo calligraphy and graffiti and stuff. And then East Coast was, they were definitely the founding fathers. New York and Philadelphia, they were doing the traditional stuff that was like very hip hop. I mean, it all has a hip hop focus, but when you think of graffiti, you're probably thinking, whether you know anything about graffiti or not, you're probably thinking of a New York or Philadelphia East Coast style graffiti. Yeah,
that imagery.
Yeah.
Tell us and. Listen, we might be going live for like hours because this is of real interest to me. Your first night was a collaboration.
Yeah, actually, I mean, now that I think about it, it was. My friend, so the funny story about that one was my friend and I went out. He dabbled in art. I was going in a little more head first. He was more into the music scene, so he was like learning about DJing and stuff like that. But we were like brothers, basically. And so, it was my job to do the outline, his job to kind of help fill it in, and then I'd do all the cleanup work, And yeah, I mean, it's funny because in the end, yeah, it was a collaborative piece. We, kind of hit up our whole neighborhood with tags around it, and it was bigger than me, I think, at the time. It was about like just putting the message out there about like our neighborhood, So
that piece, that very first piece, was how big? What? It
was probably about 10 feet wide and 5 feet tall. So, and the funny story about that one. So this is great. So it's in the back of a parking lot in a neighborhood where we grew up, and there was one of the old school big mounted cameras on this wall of the adjacent factory. It was their parking lot. And so the camera is doing a sweep every like 30 seconds to a minute. And, I'm 15, 14, I don't know. At the time, my thought process was, okay, we're going to paint that back wall, but every time the camera hits it, we're going to run away, And he's like, yeah, it sounds great. Well, what I didn't realize, thankfully, I don't think anybody was watching, but if there was a live security guy watching, what he would have seen was perfectly clean wall, outline, more color, more like a time lapse.
Like a time lapse.
Yeah, and in my head at the time, I was just like, oh, this is going to work great. And I mean, we got away with it. We painted it. We were out there way too long for the time. And but thinking back years later, I was like, oh, what was I thinking? Yeah, so.
Did you plan that? Did you have that drawn out, or was that like an improv? Like, get out there and let's just go with it.
I think I drew that one out. Yeah, and again, I wish I had a picture of it somewhere. There is my friend's mom, who's now probably in her 60s or 70s, has it tucked away in a shoebox of all of us kids posing in front of this thing, and I need that picture one day. It was pretty rough around the edges, but we loved it. It was probably, I mean, to this day, it's my favorite thing I've ever done in terms of art. Because it started it all.
I've done a couple murals in my day, and there is something about working big, right? I mean, bigger than ourselves. Is there, as you are painting large, what's the movement? I mean, I don't know, is it kind of like dancing with a paint can? I mean, is how does that?
It's tough. It depends on the scale. If it's the size of like a living room wall, I can do more like fluid movement and really get into it with my body. But when it goes to like the side of a whole building, it becomes a lot more math. And I hate to say, I hate math. Okay, I'm not a math guy. I want to be the arm swinging, flailing paint guy. But I've had to learn over the years that like when it gets to a certain scale, you got to slow it down, grid out the wall, take it in sections, make sure, step back a lot, slow yourself down. Because at first I had that graffiti mindset when I got into public art where I was like, I'm just going to attack this wall. And sometimes it would work and sometimes it didn't. And what I mean is, like, when it was finished, I was like, it looks okay, but it's not exactly like my design, and it took me years to finally understand that as it gets larger, it's a process, so yeah, definitely different as it scales up. But again, the end result, I try to make it look like it's still those giant sweeping lines and those, like if I walked up to it and swept my arm across it.
Yeah. Is there any of that early work, the 90s work, that's still out there?
Yeah, believe it or not, man. Some of my old graffiti, if you ride the RTA red line and let's say, whichever direction you went from West 25th to like West 65th, West 98th on the west side, and then, it's scattered throughout the east side as well. If you keep your eyes out, if you see the name Lost, L-O-S-T, that was the name I went by back then. And it's funny, some of the younger kids that paint now, I say kids, they're in their 20s and 30s, but I tell them sometimes, I'm like, hey, go over that wall, man. Like, get rid of this thing. It's awful. I hate looking at it anymore. And they're like, no, dude, I'm not painting. That's been there since 99. Like, yeah, to them, that would be like me back in the day, saying I'm not touching something from the 60s, and that makes me feel old.
Share with us a couple of the, you were saying the newer artists wouldn't touch that.
Yeah.
Because there's an artist's respect, right?
Yeah.
And tell us about that, because, this is artwork,
yeah.
right? And I think that people, are missing, the collaboration, the respect. Mm-hmm. And so tell us a little bit about that.
So in terms of the respect thing, I mean, there is a lot of that. It's I can't speak for every single graffiti artist or street artist, but the general consensus is like this, don't tear up a school. Like the outside of a school or something, like a library, a church, personal vehicles, like somebody's car, if it's like a work van, big white van, that might be up for debate. But, the general idea in an ideal situation is the term is like, don't go over it if you can't burn it. Meaning if you're not good enough to do better than what's there, you shouldn't even be thinking about going over it. And likewise, technically first, you should be trying to find a space away from that. Go find your own new space, because this person sought that space out, took the time and potentially the risk to paint in that place, And then the biggest one is, if there's ever a piece from a graffiti writer that has passed away, that is sacred. You don't touch it. There's artists that, like my friend Teed from Detroit, they go back and they fix his murals as they're decaying over time. And, in Detroit, he was so loved and respected that nobody would even think about touching him. But just, weather and age happens, and these newer artists or his friends from that time go back and fix them and make them look pristine again. So there's a lot of love and a lot of respect in the graffiti game, yeah.
Yeah. I like that. First time you said it was you and a buddy went out there, you guys worked together. Do you go out there and work... early days. Yeah. Did you go out there and work alone? Do you find yourself like hanging from a bridge and painting alone and doing crazy stuff?
So funny story about that. I had a lot of run-ins before with like anything you can imagine, from like police helicopters, wild dogs, etc. But the only time I went alone, I had an urge. I was in high school still, so I was 16, and nobody wanted to go paint, and I was like, I'm going, And nightfall hits. I go down to the train tracks. I walk them down to this spot I want to paint. And at the time, it was on the west side. There was a gang in that neighborhood, okay? And that gang pretty much had kind of like claimed turf over that whole area, the west side. And I was like, well, you know what? I was like, this is on the RTA line. Like, that doesn't count to me as far as I was concerned, because it's graffiti down there, And so I start painting, and I can hear like a house party up top, because it's like divider walls for the tracks, and so I'm like 15 feet down from the neighborhood, and I can hear a party up top. And I'm like, well, that's a great distraction. They won't hear the spray paint or anything. And so as I'm painting, I keep hearing like, things coming closer to the fence, like almost like beer bottles hitting the fence, and like, people walking around. So I'm playing it more careful as I go, quieter. And then I hear something coming down the hill, and I'm like, okay, somebody must have just thrown like trash down the hill or something. But I'm like, this is getting a little weird and a little sketchy. Then I just hear this down all this shrubbery, and I'm like, what the hell is that? It's like, I was like, is it a dog or something, So I get ready to see like what's going to come out of these bushes, and a guy jumps out, and I'm like, oh crap. So I think it's a cop, because I see like some shiny something here, like in this general area. So I immediately drop my cameras. I'm like, hey, I'm good. Like I don't have any weapons on me. I'm just here painting. And as I'm seeing this guy, he's walking into the foreground, into the light, and it's definitely not a cop. And I kind of wish it was, because it was one of the gangster dudes from the neighborhood. And he's walking at me with a gun sideways like this. And I'm like, all right. And he's like, yo, you know who I am? And I said, I think I do, and he said his name, and I won't say it here. And he was just notorious, him and his gang, and he was the head dude. And he's like, as he's talking to me, he's like pointing the gun like this, talking. And I'm literally, as I'm listening, and I'm trying to listen, but I'm going, fatal, not fatal, not fatal, fatal. And I'm like, this is it. This is where my life ends, And so as he's talking, he starts speaking Spanish for a minute. And I'm like, I don't speak Spanish, man. And I'm like freaked out, And he's like, I'm not talking to you. And I look up, and there's other dudes up there. And I'm pretty sure the one dude had some other kind of like rifle or shotgun or something, and so they all come down, and now I'm like surrounded by like these 10 dudes, and he's telling me about like how he came here from LA and blah blah blah, and I'm just like, oh man, how's this gonna end, and thankfully at the time I had a little bit of weed on me, and I'm just like, I didn't know what else to do. Survival mode. Like, you guys smoke weed? And they're like, yeah. So we roll up a blunt and start smoking it, and everybody's mood immediately kind of calmed down a little bit, and I was like, okay, this is where I start to figure out where we're going. So we smoke and we hang out for a few, and he's telling me stories, and I'm even telling him some stories now. This is weird, And a half hour or so goes by, and finally I'm like, all right, guys, well, if you want my paint, I figured I was getting robbed. I was like, if you want my paint, just take it. I'm like, I'd like to leave here. Hopefully we're cool. And he's like, no, man, finish your piece. And I'm like, oh, God. And so I stood there trying to compose myself, finishing this graffiti piece for at least another hour. And the whole time I'm just waiting to feel something hit me or something. And it was just nerve-wracking. And so I finished the piece. And again, I'm like, you guys want the rest of the paint? It's all yours. Take it. And we don't want your paint. Take your paint home. I was like, okay. And I pack up, throw my backpack on. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I'm like, bye, Start walking down the tracks. I'm like, this is it. This is where I'm going to hear click, boom, And I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm just like, oh, God. And I get about a half mile or so away, and I look back one more time, and they're all just staring at me on the tracks. And I'm just like, fight or flight. And I just full throttle, Olympic sprint away from the situation. And I'm going, man. I mean, I'm like wheezing by the time I get done. And I get back to my neighborhood, and I crash out for the night. And I had to ride that rapid to my school the next day. And so I'm riding the train, and I'm like looking at my new piece, or going to look at my new piece. As soon as I come up to it, it's just covered in tags. And I was like, damn, they got me. So what they wanted me to do was finish the piece, go through all that energy so that they could diss it. And I'm like, you know what? Touche. I mean, different culture, but hey, whatever, man. And, years later, I will say this. I got a phone call over 20 years later, and it was a mutual friend calling me who I trust like a friend. He's like, hey, man, so-and-so is here with me. He wants to talk to you and, like, squash this whole thing. Like, he's thought about it. He's changed. He's a changed man. He knows you're an older guy, too. He wants to meet up. And I'm like, anybody else I would thought was a setup. I'm like, this is like a brother to me, this friend that called. I was like, all right. I show up at the spot, and there he is, and he walks up, and he just holds his hand out, and I shook his hand, and he's like, it was a long time ago. He's like, different guy. I was like, yeah, me too, man. And, he's like, okay, cool. I think he wanted closure on his end, and we never saw each other again after that. So, yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Those are great stories, because most of the artists who are here, our lives are not at risk usually, right? And then there's a whole different process to that. Is there anything more that you kind of throw in to say, listen, if you're out painting, and it's at nighttime, I mean, you're at risk of the law. You're at risk of,
neighborhood vigilantes,
wild dogs, all those things. Yeah. There's a whole different, element to that I've never experienced.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. Like, I've had to hide sometimes, like, behind a pile of gravel or in a sewer entrance thing for an hour while I can see a searchlight passing by, trying to, like, zero in on where we went. And it's funny, because back then, I mean, in hindsight now, I'm like, what was I doing? But, it was a rush. Because, I didn't grow up with a lot. I grew up in a, very impoverished neighborhood. I literally at times it was like, my spray paint cans and like the clothes on my back is all I had. So for me, this was a way of like not only getting out of the neighborhood for a while and experiencing something that felt alive and good, but like trying to get myself a name outside of that neighborhood, build myself up as a person, as weird as that sounds, So there's times now I miss that rush. I haven't painted illegally, I mean, with the exception of a tag here and there, but, like a full illegal graffitis in like, I don't know, 20 years. But I mean, there's times where I'm like, I want to go back down on the RTA line and do it again, like better put the arthritis cream on my knees and be ready to run, so.
20 some years, right? You moved to muralist, right? So there was somebody at some point said, "I've got a wall. I'd love you to."
So it started out. I mean, I can't think of the earliest stuff I can think of was like, okay, so it's kind of a transitional thing where I used to go to a lot of hip hop shows and stuff, and at the Agora one night, somebody said somebody from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is looking for you here. And I'm like, what the hell does that even mean,
Yeah.
And so this lady at the time who I didn't know was Santino was her name. She was doing arts education at the Rock Hall, and she wanted me to basically. They were doing a 4 elements of hip hop thing, MC, graffiti, DJ, b-boy, and she wanted me to do the graffiti part. And I looked at her at the time, and I was like, this is like paying somebody to like teach kids how to break into cars. Like, she's like, well, you maybe don't get into all the gritty stuff, but we want to see you paint and talk about the culture. And I really had to think about it, because at the time, and even now to this day, I mean, some people would consider that being like a sellout or selling out, And I was like, all right, well, as long as I'm not like giving away all the secrets, it's like a magician, it's like I can show you the trick, but I'm not going to show you how it works, And so I started doing this program there, and eventually she started her own organization, and I moved on from the Rock Hall with her and a team of artists, and for like the next decade, that's what we were doing, arts education in school. And so then I started meeting these people that were involved in like public art and stuff, and this was during sort of the East Fourth Renaissance, when it was like they were gutting everything and cleaning it out. And my friend Joan Perch was involved with that. She had a gallery downtown, and she's like, hey, they've got walls, they're just big construction walls, they look awful. I said, why don't we bring some of these artists in to paint on them? So I called some of my friends in, and we started at first doing graffiti, but then I was like, just started to get into the abstract. I was like, you know what, I'm going to take one of these walls for myself and just do one of these abstracts and see what it looks like. And, I worked my way through it, and I was like, all right, I like this. And, it was just like every so often I would get this call, like, hey, we saw your piece downtown, want to do a wall here and a wall here. And it just kept snowballing and just came down to networking,
And all of a sudden, you find yourself pulled into a lot of different projects, probably unexpected.
Yeah.
Because as I take a look at kind of your content, I see painting walls. I see sometimes painting 3-dimensional figures.
Mm-hmm.
I see what appears to be like hired work to go, hey, Bob, can you paint this on our wall? And so you found yourself
doing really a little bit of everything, yeah. And that's the thing, I realized recently, because I've been doing this for so long, there's a whole generation of people that only knew my abstract work. And so recently I started posting some of the older graffiti and some of the, just this summer I did this giant 2-story tall Scooby-Doo mural. And it's like, so I like to go back to my roots. And I love the abstract work and the design and all that, but I like to take on the challenges of painting a 57 Chevy or Scooby-Doo or whatever the case may be, just to show and flex those muscles once in a while in a different direction,
Yeah. Your style. How has that evolved? In other words, if somebody sees your work in 2020, mm-hmm. right, and see your work from 10 or 15 or 20 years prior to that, are they able to say, here's Bob Peck's early work and here's his 20 years later? Or is the evolution so different that you've shed that early grit, maybe? I don't even know if that's the right word.
No, I think you're nailing it. That's a great question. And I have people who can identify from the early to later. I think if you showed my graffiti next to my abstract, you would see no resemblance. But if you saw my abstract from 10, 15 years ago to now, even though it looks completely different, you would be able to say, yeah, it's the same guy. It's become with myself maturing and with the paints becoming better products over the years and having access to those better paints, it's become a little more, what's the word I'm looking for, fine-tuned. Some of my earlier stuff was a little all over the place and kind of loose, but it looked great. I mean, I still love my old works. There's times where I try and go back and bring some of the old into the new, because I look back and I'm like, damn, I lost that little bit of looseness here, and I have to remind myself sometimes it doesn't have to be super clean. You can still just let it fly once in a while. So yeah. But it evolves every few years. I definitely see it. Yeah.
What was some and maybe here in the next couple minutes, maybe after this question, I'm really interested in seeing. I know that you've got like a studio space here where you close the door behind you, and there's all kinds of work here that people are dying to see what the work looks like.
Nice.
We've been talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is an unexpected or maybe a couple unexpected things that you've painted? To say, okay, so, over 30-some years, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the unexpected...
So one comes to mind immediately. In terms of theme, I had a church reach out to me once, and real nice people, really great. They actually even offered me, because this was early in my career, so I was still lowballing myself, and they paid me more than I asked for, but they wanted in their words, a graffiti-style Last Supper on their wall. So it's like 20-foot-long wall of Jesus and the disciples, and I'm just like... kind of conflicted at the time. I'm like, do I do this? What does this even mean? And, I did it. It turned out okay. In hindsight, as an older artist now, I probably would have done some things differently. But, at the time, they loved it. And I was just like, this is different,
What a challenge.
It's definitely, I'm just trying to paint Jesus. And I'm like, with a spray can, I'm like, hey, why not, So that's one that comes to mind. And then, like you said, I've been getting into three-dimensional work. So that's been interesting, trying to find ways to keep the same style, but wrap it around a surface rather than just a one-dimensional flat surface. So now it's the idea of, okay, it has to go on the surface, come up, over, behind, maybe around twice, and then still connect and make sense as not only every angle you look at it at, but as a whole as you rotate around it. So I've done things like utility boxes where it's like, okay, it's got to look as an individual image from all four sides, but then also, again, connect and keep moving as it goes. So that's always a challenge, yeah. But I love it. It's a good challenge, It's like a brain teaser.
All right, I'm going to just talk to the folks in the audience here real quick. Feel free to throw in comments. Feel free to ask some questions. I know that there's going to be some folks there. If you're in the audience right now, you may just be enthralled at listening to the story, and we're going to pause a few times and take questions, so go ahead and throw those out there. If you share this interview, we appreciate it, because sharing gets Bob's story and Bob's work, and I think it connects other artists here in Ohio and outside of Ohio together. And if you share, we know it, and next week we're going to give away a nice signed print of Bob's and
Rich Seiler, yeah. So Rich and I work closely together. We do a lot of projects around the city, a lot of gallery shows together. So yeah, it's a really cool piece.
A great collaboration. Yeah. So we'll do that.
Dwayne Hudson has a question. He just wants to know what your thoughts are on Banksy.
Okay. So Banksy always comes up in the art world. Here's the thing. So I know Banksy now is like, when you say Banksy, it's almost like when you say Google or Xerox. It's the name for street art. I respect Banksy because I have seen his work since like the early 2000s, and he even comes from a graffiti background. So, I know some people are like, it's just, quick, cheap stencils and stuff. But there's a level of wit to his work that is, I wouldn't say, I almost said unmatched. Not unmatched, but it's rare to have that much wit along with art that was illegal. Now I know nowadays, like, his work is like, if a Banksy shows up, they cover it with plexiglass and it's like police protection and stuff. But, even 10 years ago, it wasn't like that, so it was like, he was still out there in the middle of the night, risking his ass and trying to just make art for the love of it. And then obviously it snowballed into him making one hell of a career out of it. So yeah, kudos to him, man. He's doing huge art installations now, like on the Gaza Strip, where he basically turned a whole hotel into a political piece about, everything going on over there. And most artists can't even, most artists will make political art, but at the level of, I'm going to take a hotel and turn it into a symbol of this situation and an art piece. I'm just like, all right, man, good for you, so.
Yeah. Thank you, Dwayne, for that question.
Yeah, great question.
Keep them coming up. Any others questions there before we when you're attacking a piece now? I don't know if attacking is the right word, but when you're playing a piece right now,
sure. Yeah.
Are you finding yourself planning those pieces, or are you finding yourself, it's kind of like a jazz musician, getting to the point where you're like, no, I'm going to go there and I'm going to improv the work, and I'll let it emerge and create itself. Is that happening?
So two sides to that coin. I try to keep as much improv as I can into it. If it's a canvas, absolutely. There is no planning. I mean, unless in the rare instance somebody's like, hey, I want it to fit in this space and I'd like these colors and maybe have it point this way, Okay. But no, like there's actually a painting right behind or in front of us behind the camera right now where it's just I grab color and I just go for it,
Is that this piece right here?
Yeah, so
let's turn it around.
Go ahead. Just getting started, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and take a look at that piece.
So this piece here is sort of right on the floor here in front of the chair.
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. The other artist you were just showing is a great guy, a great friend, Paul Rogers. But no, this is the piece in question here. So this is the beginning layers. So there's not a lot there right now. It's very minimal, and it's far from done. It's like maybe 10% in. So it's literally my process is like I'll set out sometimes a blank canvas right there, and I'll just hang out and watch TV or whatever, and I'll look over and I just start to get this vision of shapes. And then I'll apply a layer of color and a few shapes. And then over the next few days, whether it's the next day or even a few days in between, I'll start to add more and more and more, and then it becomes a piece. But when I do walls now, I do try to plan those out because, it's a giant wall. It's there for the public to see, and you got to have a little process. But yeah, my paintings, I try to be 100% just freeform with it. Yeah.
So you said like about 10% done on this. Are there times where like you get in and you're like, listen, I'm about 10% done or 25% done, and you're like, I'm going to put down the can and I'm done because
it's pretty rare. Yeah. And honestly, to be honest, sometimes it backfires because I've been known to overwork pieces once in a while, and I've had to learn that too. But so no, there's rarely ever a time where I'll go, it's done before I expect it. There's a little bit of a process where I kind of know. It's not like to an exact number, but I know how many layers there should be to create the effect I want. So if it was only like 2 layers, I'm like, yeah, that looks nice. Would it sell? Probably. But it's not my style. It's not my brand. You would see that piece and you go, it kind of looks like one of Bob's pieces, but it doesn't look like, a complete finished piece. Yeah, so.
You have this piece here, and we're here in your living room. This piece is, it's dynamic.
Thank you.
Tell us about this, because it's 2 canvases, right?
It is. So it was one of those situations where I just happened to have 2 blank canvases, same size, sitting around, and I was thinking like, I haven't done anything a little bit larger lately, and I just kind of set them up, and at the time I actually just kind of drilled them together so that they would be one cohesive piece of material, and I started working on that, and then, when it's done, I broke it back apart, because I like the spacing in between. It kind of allows the main body on the right to exist, but then break free from the boundary into the left canvas there. So yeah, I do like to do diptych pieces once in a while and have the work kind of travel across multiple panels, multiple planes. I did a garage door like that one time. There was 2 garage doors, and I had the work actually start on one and then almost look like it tucked behind the other garage door, or the other, tucked behind the divider into the other garage door and break apart the 2 sections, but it's still a piece as a whole. So,
this. How long ago did you paint this?
That was painted earlier this year, actually, not too long ago. Yeah,
so a newer piece.
Yeah, in the springtime. Yeah, absolutely.
Are you gonna give us the?
You want to take a walk around?
Yeah, let's walk around and check out
MTV Cribs. Yeah. So my studio space is right over this way. It's not a very big place, but it works for working at home. I also work in some other places as well, or work outside. But basically, this is my workspace. There's some work tables I set out as needed. Here's some various news articles from over the years on the walls here too. Just kind of highlight stuff of projects I've done and different stories. One, I won't get, it's too long of a story to get into now, but these 3 frame pieces actually get into my career as an artist, writing a book about it, and then eventually finding my long-lost father as a result of all these articles coming together as a trilogy. So That's a story for another time. Takes forever to tell, but basically, my friend Mike Gill used to work for Free Times and wrote some stories, and some family members that I didn't know existed saw the stories and connected me back with my dad. So
that's great. So are you also an author?
Well, in the sense that I wrote a book about the whole adventure. I did write one book 16 years ago. I self-published it. I want to go back eventually and clean it up because I feel like I could write it better now, as I'm older. And so how it came to be was when I went to find my dad in Washington, D.C., where he was at a military retirement home, I was telling the story to a bartender of how this whole adventure of being an artist, a graffiti artist, getting my name in the paper led me to finding my dad. And as I'm telling the story, he kind of looks past me, and I look back, and there's like 10 people listening to this story now. And they're like, the one guy goes, dude, when you get home, write a book about this. And so I sat down, and my goal was every day to write one page about this story. And a year later, I had actually written 436 pages. And that's why now I'm like, I could clean it up. But yeah, it's a little paperback, or it was. And it tells the story of starting out, as a graffiti artist in Cleveland, kind of going through some real tough times with my mom, and how graffiti kind of brought me out of that and brought me into a whole new world, a new life, and then finding my dad as a result. Yeah.
There's a lot of canvases around here.
There's a lot of canvases. So these are all finished paintings here. These two I can't show you. Those are top secret projects for a future show. Okay. But these here I can definitely share.
I'm going to move this out here just so I don't knock this over here in your studio.
So yeah, I mean, I'll pull a couple out. These are some more recent ones here. So yeah, this is some of my abstract work here. This piece, and then these are 30 by 40 inch. They're all spray paint, marker, and acrylic on canvas. Mostly spray paint on these ones. As I'm starting to do my newer work, I don't know why, just there's less and less acrylic paint. There's only a few little acrylic brush strokes on that piece there that you're looking at. And then let's see what else we got. I'll bring out a couple more here. Yeah, that's a newer piece as well. Actually, we'll bring it into the light. This one I just finished up the other day. Hopefully you can see that okay in here. It's a little bit of a darker piece. But I've been trying to, kind of like I was saying earlier about bringing in some of the old with the new. I've been bringing in a little more looseness, just letting paint kind of fling and fly as it goes so that it's not too clean looking, and just creating a lot of depth, a lot of layers, putting things kind of almost fading out into the background, and just trying to have fun with it essentially. So. And then while we're in here too, this is the print we were talking about.
Oh yeah.
So this is the Don't Panic Phoenix that Rich Seiler and I did in 2020. This was when COVID first hit, and we all thought we were just going to be on lockdown for 2 weeks and life would go back to normal. And so we just did this piece about Phoenix because it was kind of a rising from the ashes of the situation. And it says, Cleveland, temper us in fire, and we grow stronger. This was in a building, it's kind of like a little graffiti haven over on the east side. So we painted it in there on a very cold day. I remember we had a space heater with us trying to keep warm. But it's a real fun piece, real cool. Rich typically does more like realistic animals and things like that, but I convinced him to do a phoenix that day. And he did a really awesome job. And then I did, all the abstract work bursting out from the phoenix that's right there. So this piece could be yours soon.
So if you share this video, we know it, and next week we're going to draw a name, and the winner will get this piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
The canvases, right? When you are in a mode, you're in the zone, right?
Yeah.
Is it do you hope to get a canvas done a week, a canvas done a night? Are you like, no? I mean, I'm used to working big. Do I line them up and...
Right. And that's a good question. So I realized at one point that I was doing one every 2 weeks. And so that somehow became an unofficial goal. And I realized over the course of a few years that I was burning myself out. I had started this, it was just too rigid, I was like, okay, next one. You just finished it, but you're a week behind. You better jump on the next one. And I'm like, who is this deadline for? Sometimes, don't get me wrong, I do have shows where I have to get stuff ready for, but I was creating this deadline that was like hurting my art and hurting my creativity. So now it's like, I want to still make sure I'm productive, but it's about one a month, and there is no you have to do it. It's like, if you want to take a week off and just play video games, do it, man. Live your life, So So that's where I'm at. So I try to every few weeks to a month, I would say these days. So yeah.
Will you share with us a little bit about your what you paint with?
Yeah, absolutely. So right down here on the floor, this is all stuff I've tried to clean up. Actually, this crate just came back today from another project just a few hours ago. So this is all mostly Montana is the spray paint brand I use. And you can see the color is indicated on the top of the can, which is kind of cool. And so it's like an artist grade spray paint made by graffiti artists for graffiti artists, essentially. So it's the Montana 94 line. It's real high opacity, low pressure cans. We use special caps with these cans that allow almost like an airbrush style control as you spray. If you don't get me wrong, it takes practice still, but it helps. It's not a big fuzzy line. It's not a lot of paint flying out like you would expect from hardware store paint.
And obviously tops on here. So do you clean the tops? I mean, in other words, are you taking them out and?
So at the range of painting I'm at now, I buy them in bulk. So these are. It actually says on here what it is and how it sprays. And then this is called an Astro Fat, which sprays actually like a giant softball like pattern. So you can see the difference in the actual dot size. And they're different colored caps. But yeah, I buy them by the hundreds now because. And there's more random ones up there my friend gave me. Because I'll burn through, God, I don't even know, maybe 1,000 caps a year sometimes, if not more. So yeah, you just get them in bulk. Back in the day, we used to have to steal them off of spray starch and whatever other stuff you could find that would make an interesting spray pattern. But now there's an industry that exists based on the idea of graffiti art, which is wild, so.
And obviously, right? This is not what you started with because this is professional. Let's call it professional grade.
Is, yeah.
What is a can of this?
This is about $9 a can, $9 a can. So definitely a lot more than the $3 Krylon back in the day. So that's a big thing too, and I'm glad you mentioned that because a lot of times when you have to give a price to a person, and they're like, well, I want my kid's bedroom wall done, or I want the side of my building done. And it's like, okay, well, you got to realize how much this paint costs, So, and then also what the artist is worth. So it's like sometimes you throw out a number, and people don't realize they go into sticker shock, But I mean, right here, you're looking at
$500
easily
right?
$500 worth of paint, yeah, just in that middle section, yeah. So yeah.
And that's an important piece, and that is you don't get the vibrant colors as well as the opacity, and the layering and with cheap paint.
Right, yeah, even the lasting power of it being on a wall. I've got stuff, and don't get me wrong, like Rust-Oleum back in the day is great. I still have stuff from the 90s that was painted with Rust-Oleum that held up. But if you're talking like the Walmart paint, that's going to fade off a wall in a year, the orange is going to turn yellow or white, I've even seen. So, yeah, you can only go so far with the super cheap stuff, yeah.
When you fit, if you were to do a mural now, right? Exterior mural, right? Are you using this paint?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Montana is my big go-to. I use other brands occasionally, there's one called Cobra. I've experimented with a few other brands that are good, but I know Montana, when I grab a can of Montana paint, I know exactly how it's going to spray. I know how much pressure to put on the cap. And exactly what kind of line I'm going to get every time consistently, So it's like the level of Pepsi. Every time you've had a Pepsi in your life, it tastes exactly like the same Pepsi. Yeah. So yeah.
What about if you're doing an exterior mural? Are you finding that you're sealing it? Are you sealing?
I've started looking into it more because it does help, and they even make graffiti-proof coating, which is funny if you think about spray painting something and then putting a graffiti-proof coating on that. So it is something that's an option. It's very expensive in terms of if you're doing it at a grassroots level, for a corner store or something. You have to tell them hey, this stuff is. Don't quote me on that. I want to say it's $50 to $100 a gallon sometimes for the good stuff. So it can hike up the price. But I would say if the budget allows, absolutely clear coat and seal it up because it'll only add longevity to the piece.
Yeah, we're in your studio.
Yeah.
So there's times that I see a mask, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
sometimes you get in here and you'll start to spray away.
Oh yeah, you gotta be careful. So like that window, I have a very rudimentary ventilation system, if you want to call it that. I basically open the window, I've got that fan, and it exhausts out, and I have to close the door to like keep the rest of my house not freaking smelling like paint. So yeah, I try, and then also, you know, as I get older, learning when to take a break. If I can see the clouds in the air, it's like, all right, dude, time to get out of here. Take an hour, let it all suck out of here, and then come back. When I was younger, I would just be standing in these fumes, and like I'd come out like spaced out of my mind. And you just, I mean, for obvious health reasons, you can't do that.
You can't do
know?
that, yeah.
So yeah, as I get older, I definitely learn.
I was down, and actually I had shared it as kind of as we were promoting this interview. I was down by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I just stepped out. I was walking by, and I was like, "Hey, here's a Bob Peck," you know,
the advertisements
there.
So those are fun, yeah.
Where do we see your work? Some folks are like, listen, you know, I've heard of Bob Peck, or it's the first time I've seen his work or heard of his. How do we find your work and start to follow you?
Yeah, well, I mean, social media is at Bob Peck Art for everything. BOBPECKART. I'll pop up on Instagram or Facebook. In terms of my actual paintings, I sell my work through a company called Saatchi Art, and that's SAATCHI Art.
We'll attach it here too.
So yeah, if you do saatchiart.com/Bob Peck Art, you will see a current listing of and images of all my paintings, whether they've been sold or not, and if they're still available, how much. And it's a great company. They promote artists around the world. Anybody can sign up too, so if you're an artist, check it out. You can make a page and start selling paintings on there. And the nice thing about it is it's not like a robotic process. There are real curators who are seeing, I think, every painting that comes in every day. It's their job. And if you catch their eye, if they like your work, they will, you know, help promote your work. Through Saatchi, I've sold dozens of paintings all over the country. I have 2 in London, 1 in China. I mean, just you name it. And they help get my work out into the public realm. So I can't thank them enough, you know. So, yeah.
And for like the advertisements, I mean, people don't see your work without advertisements. Are there some places you're like, listen, it's important to hit here, or...
So I'll be transparent about the advertisements. This is kind of a fun one. You know, people see those and they go, how the hell is he doing this, you know? And the truth of the matter is, I mean, you know, I have some resources. I'm, you know, still kind of at the starving artist level, believe it or not. Like, with all the work I do, I still scratch out a living. But my point being is, those I got because I work in print by my day job. I work a day job and I work in digital print. And one of our clients owns all those, they call them kiosks. And during COVID, nobody was advertising anymore. And he comes in one day, he goes, do you want to put some of your art in these kiosks to fill space during COVID? I was like, absolutely, yeah. I'm on it right now. I literally jumped into Photoshop, started formatting everything. I knew all the sizes I needed to do. And he just started pushing them into these kiosks. And the next thing I know, I'm getting calls from people. The next day, like, dude, I'm seeing your stuff downtown. I'm seeing it here and there. And, you know, so now we have a great rapport. When there's empty spaces, they put my work in. And, I mean, it's a win-win, you know? So,
Heck yeah. So if there's any questions, now's the time to shoot them out. And I know that we're just kind of taking in the information. Outside of murals, you know, you're kind of your graffiti in the past. Is there other artwork that you're working on? You're like, yeah, a little known fact about Bob Peck is that you know you'll see his work, you know.
Yeah.
Work.
Oh man. You know, I kind of play it pretty close with what I do. It's like do one thing and do it well, you know. So the main focus is the abstract and the gallery work. The secondary tier is still having fun doing graffiti and characters. You know, I've dabbled my whole life with all kinds of stuff. Like I mentioned, I was into comic books as a kid. I don't draw comics anymore, but yeah, you know, that's the big two for me right there. Is just, you know, the abstract and the graffiti. So yeah, who knows? Maybe in another decade or so, you could see me doing something completely different. You know, and the 3-dimensional work, I'm doing that as well. So that would probably be the newest thing. Yeah.
Are there a couple paintings that are on your walls where you're like, these are a couple favorite of mine? There's a reason why this one is hanging up. Is there any that you want to kind of finish this off?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you come into the dining room here, this is one that I did late last year. It's called Rough Seas, and it's a good example of some of my modern work. It's definitely a little more clean, I would like to say, you know, where it's like there's not a lot of splatters, there's not a lot of rough stuff. And I just like the way it flows. There's a very obvious foreground and background to it. and there's a really nice sense of depth in it. So this was one. When I moved in, I hung it up because I wanted to I just like looking at it. And it was funny because this is the only time this has happened in my life. I started this painting and I screwed it up and I overworked it to the point where I threw it out. And I just got so mad, I just threw it out in the trash. And it was beyond repair. So I got a second canvas and I pulled it out from the trash and I recreated as far as I got before I felt it was overworked. So this is actually the second iteration of that painting, but it's like 90% true to what the original one was before I trashed it. Yeah.
You had talked about pens.
Yeah.
Right. So to tell us about a pen compared to a can.
Oh yeah. Well, I do love working with markers and pens. It's a lot of fun. So all these little fine lines here, like the red and the white, that's all marker stroke. You know, even like these little larger doodads here. So yeah, it's real fun to be able to like sweep your hand across, and I love just like creating these nice little tapers on the ends of lines. And even like just different line weights where things connect. And I had a friend that was like a mentor to me. He went by the graffiti name of Presto, and he would teach me as a kid. He called it the line of confidence, and he would just have me draw over and over and over these little dagger stroked lines. And it was like Mr. Miyagi, you know. Like, I mean, I would do these dozens of times. And I'm like, dude, when is this enough? But it taught me how to really control a marker or a pen, and you know, do things like cross hatching and stippling and all that, because I felt so comfortable. I knew exactly the weight I needed to put on the end of a marker or a pen, and just what it felt like when that line was about to leave the surface, you know. And I go by sound a lot of times. I hear it and I go, shh, you know, and I know it's going to create that perfect little taper if that's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Well, painting by feel or painting by sound doesn't happen overnight or with years.
It takes a lot of drugs. No.
and decades of work. And I'll tell you what, we appreciate, Bob, you sharing your story.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you guys joining us today, and we covet your shares. And so if you share this video, right, we'll know it. Next week, you'll get the opportunity to have that print.
Yep.
And it's a great print, and wow, I can't wait to just keep on seeing your work. What about, is there anything, are you up in any galleries right now?
So right at this very moment, no gallery shows, but I do have a big mural coming up this spring with Destination Cleveland and Graffiti Heart. They have helped gather, I want to say 6 or 8 artists throughout the city who are getting these very large walls promoting the city of Cleveland, but with each artist's own artistic style. So be on the lookout for that. The wall is to be determined, so I don't even know where it's at yet, but there's a few walls already that have gone out this year from other artists, so that's a big one for springtime. And then Rich and I will be doing our next Don't Panic show in April or May as well, and that's called the Don't Panic Room, where it's actually going to be a gallery show with our art, but it's also going to be filled with clues and puzzles, and if you figure out the clues first, you could actually win a free painting.
I love it. Bob, thank you for sharing your time and your story with us, and thank you guys for joining us this Tuesday. We'll see you next week.